am, you are, we are crazy. I am, you are, we are crazy. I am, you are, we are crazy.
Gong were weird. They were an Anglo-French band. They started in Paris in 1967 with a member of a band called Soft Machine, a guy called David Allen, and a professor. But they floundered when the pair had to flee the country to avoid arrest. They emerged again in the early 70s and soon produced a trio of albums, which they are most famous for, which is the Radio Gnome Invisible trilogy, which charts a bizarre set of fantasy stories which are quite reminiscent of the classic French comic book Metal Hurlant. They have a strong psychedelic flavour. In 1975, David Allen had a incident just before a concert. He refused to go on stage, claiming that a wall of force was preventing him from doing so, and he promptly left the band. The others decided to carry on without him. A bit later, he came back, and then they all got mixed up in some kind of cement mixer and spat out at frequent intervals in ever more complicated combinations. So making head or tail of their history is a kind of nightmare or some kind of specialist geek pastime. So at one point, well, I'm not sure about at one point, but there have been so many different combinations, and they often took different names. So they were Gong, but there were Pierre Morland's Gong, there was Gong Espresso, Gong Maison, Planet Gong, Acid Mother's Gong, New York Gong, Gong Global Family, Mother Gong, Paragon, and so on. When you then factor in the relationships between people and the fact that they had communal living at various points, visa entry refusals, fleeing a country to avoid arrest, which we had earlier, I think they look more like a soap opera than a band. Their music is also quite often very weird, but often very, very nice and silly in a good way. Hi, my name's Dan. So often with these reviews, most often with these reviews, I'm meeting an album for the first time. This album, in the interests of full disclosure, this is definitely not the case. So I've had a copy of this album in my possession for many years. I think I bought a vinyl copy first, probably somewhere about 1985, 1986. And I've played it relatively often since because I quite like it as an album. So this is the first in their trilogy about what's called the Gong mythology. So it's a made-up setting of the planet Gong. And the story follows the random meanderings of a guy called Zero the Hero and his encounters, on this album, his encounters with the Good Witch Yoni and the Pothead Pixies. The Pothead Pixies live in a flying teapot and operate a telepathic radio station called Radio Gnome Invisible. If, at this point, you're starting to think that there might be some illicit substances involved, well, you could be right, okay. The album is very trippy and quite hippie. It definitely falls into the psychedelic category with quite a lot of vocal sound effects and processing, including a really nice bubbling effect on the voices. And it's got extended space rock style instrumental passages. Musically, it owes some to Pink Floyd from that time and earlier, but also to some of the prog rock bands who are more into the kind of jazz crossover. One of their members was from Soft Machine, and there was that kind of background as well. And they were part of a thing called the Canterbury scene, which tended to have that jazz element in. It's quite nice, but bonkers. So if you like a bit of jazz rock with a healthy dose of bonkersness, then this might be for you. It doesn't take itself too seriously, but surprisingly, when you dig into it, some of the musicianship is pretty good, actually. I particularly like some of the use of melody instruments, so stuff with sax and flute. There's some nice grooves, kind of almost funky grooves going on at times in the background. It's a shame that at times the musical production isn't as good as the vocal production tricks that are being used. The subject matter is definitely psychedelic. The last track includes a few rude words and rude ideas, but generally it's fairly tame otherwise. It's not overtly druggy. You have to read into the subtext to pick that up. In many ways, I'd say it's quite a unique listening experience. There's not a lot of stuff like this around, even in the psychedelic world. I do really like it, but I admit that it is a bit of a niche album. And I'd love to know what you think about it. So please let me know in the comments down below. That's it from me for now.